Yo, what's good with you? Back in black with another Enlisted video. If you guys are new to the channel and you love shooting games just like me, make sure you aim for that like button and shoot that subscribe button as well. It'll help you find better teammates and improve your skill-based matchmaking. At least I hope so anyways. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the most disliked game mode in Enlisted currently, and probably since the game's inception. Veterans will know that we are talking about Conquest. This mode basically consists of 3 capture points that are static throughout the map that you and the enemy team will have to fight for, as far as capturing and holding to drain the other team's reinforcement points as fast as possible. Very akin to Battlefield's congruently named Conquest for some, or maybe more similar to Call of Duty's domination game mode for others, depending on how fast your Conquest matches typically go by. But I think the Call of Duty domination comparison is a little more accurate, and that's going to lead me into my first major complaint that I've noticed about this game mode from my research, and that is that the Conquest game modes are typically very short. On some occasions, the teams can be evenly matched, which can make the game last longer than 10 to 12 minutes, but from what I have seen from the general public, there are many complaints of Conquest feeling like a waste of time due to the shortened matches, which subsequently result in lower experience gained per session with each cumulative Conquest match that is played. This problem is exacerbated even more when you think about all the times that you had a 200% experience booster, or honestly any booster for that matter, and then you get back-to-back Conquest matches on top of that, almost as if it was predetermined for some odd reason. It's conspiracy on my end, but I wouldn't be too surprised if players who hit search and have a booster active are heavily weighted towards Conquest to artificially extend the grind and playtime, provided they don't just outright leave every Conquest match that they get into. And that kind of makes me curious. I would like to know down in the comments section, how many of you hate Conquest so much that you will leave the match even with the booster on, or generally speaking, do you just find yourself leaving every Conquest match that you get into just because, again, you hate the game mode? The next big issue with Conquest that I have seen from my internet browsing and also from my personal experience is that it just feels a little too repetitive sometimes. Not only as far as like the one cutout section of a map that you'll be fighting over or in for the entirety of that game, but just the simple notion of running in circles between A, B, and C on any given map is enough to turn a large portion of the player base off. And again, that's why we see such high quitting rates on that game mode whenever it actually does pop up, which is not something that is good for the game generally speaking. And I'm sure a lot of people will counter argument in the comment section that basically you could just hunker down on one objective if you don't want to be that person that is currently, or constantly I should say, running around between A, B, C, or D. And that is a valid way to play for the defensively minded player, but just being a devil's advocate here, I'm sure it feels very limiting and monotonous to players who actually do like to run around and get in as many engagements as possible with the opposing team, and as soon as possible as well. That said, we do need to speculate and come up with some ways to make Conquest a more desirable game mode for all players to play, no matter the playstyle, as generally speaking, and this comes from my Battlefield experience, I feel that Conquest should be the most freeform game mode available as far as like choosing how you want to play as a player, and there should be no limiting factors that should funnel you into just play defensively, or I don't want to run around in circles over and over again, because I understand both perspectives. Anyways, I do have a list of changes in my head that would address all the previously mentioned complaints and therefore make Conquest a exponentially better game mode to play, not only for me but just for everybody generally speaking. And first and foremost, the game mode just needs a lot more variety in general. Don't you guys find it a little strange or peculiar that we only have like 1 or 2 maps in the entire game that feature Conquest with 5 points to capture instead of the usual 3? Shit, man, I mean, honestly, I think they should have maps that have 4 capture points as well, and then that way they can have a well-rounded rotation of Conquest variants that will feel quite I said will, that will feel quite different from one match and map to another, even if you got the same game mode multiple times in a row. This is all hypothetical in my head, but I'm thinking, the maps that obviously have 3 capture points can retain the same layout that they currently have, being quite small and quite circular with a point placed on each third of the map. That's fine exactly how it is, I guess, if you want to leave that in the game. But for the maps that have 4 capture points, you could obviously make a bigger portion of the map and you can cut that into a square or a rectangular layout. And this would probably be better for maps that consist, or maps that are set in cities, for lack of better words. The reason I say that is because city maps usually consist of a lot of alleyways and like main lanes, as well as plenty of side lanes for flanking opportunities, so it kind of makes more sense to have a rectangular or square layout for those kind of maps anyways. But neither here nor there for the ever so rare maps that will have the 5 capture points. Usually for those, I would appreciate it just like the Reichstag, for example, if they utilize much larger portions of the map than the player base would typically be used to. And I'm sure a lot of you guys might say, or some of you guys might say, you prefer the smaller maps, but I would just argue that the bigger maps would make vehicles much more useful than they typically tend to be in Conquest, because I usually don't see them that much unless I'm playing Invasion or Assault or a Confrontation or something of that nature. So it would make vehicles have more of a place in Conquest and not necessarily be abandoned for just using APC, since it's going to be a smaller, more infantry focused type of game mode anyways, if that makes any sense. Not only that, and on bigger maps obviously rally points would be more apparent, so the team that has a better grasp on that concept as a whole will typically be able to take advantage of that, and that kind of just changes the play style and player dynamic of people who actually understand the game versus people who don't, and people who do obviously should win more often as a result. Neither here nor there, just tweaking the size of the maps, what portions and locations of the maps are being used, the shape and the layout of the out of bound lines obviously, and the number of capture points. All of these things could severely impact the gameplay on each map, and this is all with one game mode, keep that in mind. So these are all just things that would keep the game mode feeling fresher on a match to match basis, even if you get Conquest back to back multiple times in a row. And we don't even have to stop there. Of course, my creativity is not limited to just one fix. For the larger maps in particular, it would also be much more reason to increase the player count per match. But this is only for the maps that have 5 capture points. Instead of having players, leaving every Conquest match, you could now look forward to it, because those would be the matches where you would have 12v12 or 15v15 instead of the usual 10v10, which that could also be feeling a little monotonous after a while, and people may expect a more battlefield type of approach from them at some point. Not only would adding a few more players increase the scale and awe of the game on these larger Conquest maps, it would also be a bigger reason to add in more spawn vehicles for regular infantry soldiers to use, i.e. the Jeep, the half-track, the motorcycles. And I'm imagining all of these things would be even more useful and apparent on big North African Conquest maps. And I guess, again, this is all hypothetical, but I'm imagining if they make a really big North African map, then we can just have games where there's a lot more tanks in the open desert, and it would feel more so like it wasn't real life as opposed to being infantry only in the desert, which, yeah, that does happen, but more so in the city maps as opposed to the wide open desert battles, which were also a big part of the North African campaign. But I'm getting a little too specific. But you see where I'm going with this when I'm just thinking about bigger Conquest maps in general. The last thing that I could think of that would make the Conquest mode more fun and more exciting, generally speaking, is expanding on that secondary objective concept and events like they did with the Invasion game mode on that one airfield map. If you don't know, basically on the airfield map in particular, they had a mechanic where, if you were running low on lives as the attackers, you could hop in a plane and basically shoot at the blimps, the barrage balloons, to get more or extra lives for your team. and I haven't seen that concept like expanded on since they said, since they introduced it in the blog post. They said they were going to add more things like that, but again, I haven't seen anything. And I understand that in retrospect it wasn't necessarily executed that well, because a team could be at like 400 lives, shoot like a few balloons, then they're back up to like 700, 800, which kind of feels unfair for the defenders. But I just feel that one, or that event in particular, wasn't executed that well. But in the same respect, I just kind of find it funny how the blog post said they were going to expand on that and they just never did. So it just kind of sucks when like something isn't successful the first time around and then they just kind of like give up on the idea. But even if they need some motivation or like some quick examples as far as like secondary objectives for the Conquest game mode, I can come up with a few off the top of my head. Just really quick, like let's say D is like a radio station as far as like a capture point is concerned, and it becomes a key objective for like an entire minute. If your team or the enemy team, it doesn't matter, holds that objective for an entire minute, since it's a radio station, your team will get an automatic bombing run to come in and bomb the enemy team if you can complete that secondary objective, and everybody on your team gets an extra 200 or 300 points since you guys were successful. Not only would that increase the stakes of the game, it would make people want to PTFO more, which is one of the main gripes that I find typically when it comes to Enlisted, where the players typically just don't play the objective or don't feel motivated enough to do so. So that's one example right there. Another example, let's say your team is losing by a very large margin, key objective or secondary objective pops up. If you can complete it successfully, boom, your bar fills back up a little bit. Maybe you can swing the game back in your favor and actually win if you were losing by a large margin, like I said. So just again, some easy secondary objectives that can add some flair and some stakes and some pizzazz to the game mode of Conquest. But again, these are all just hypothetical changes off the top of my head that I'm thinking of that could, obviously make the Conquest game mode less of an eyesore whenever it does pop up on your screen. However, I do want to know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Is there any other changes or revisions that you would make to the Conquest game mode that I haven't touched on in this video? Let me know down in the comment section, and while you're down there, don't forget to aim for that like button and shoot that subscribe button as well. Help you find better teammates and improve your skill-based matchmaking. Do appreciate you guys for watching if you have made it this far, and yeah, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Black Guy out.